Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. So let's gather together around this hypothetical crackling fire and listen to a lovely story tonight. I do hope you're well, and I'm very well, so it's so good to be here. And don't forget to get that perfect, fabulous drink, whatever it is, and let me know whereabouts in the world you're from, because it's lovely to get together, doesn't matter where we are geographically, to listen to a lovely story. But before we get started, don't forget to get that drink and also to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, in a quiet, subdued, charming, prepossessing country town in North Carolina, nestled in the heart of a beguiling pretty valley, set up against the twirling shapes of the mountains that rise up in the sky in an ocean of soft undulating waves, was a very cosy, close-knit community of like-minded convivial people, a charming, endearing, welcoming southern hospitality that would warm up the cockles of the coldest heart. It would seem that at first glance, when enjoying the wondrous spectacular views over our town, you could easily be forgiven for thinking that the pretty curvaceous faint blue and purple smudges painted on the horizon, the quintessential landmarks I knew so well, had been applied with the skilled tweak of an artist's brush, for they were so subtle, the soft contours only adding to the lure of this transfixing space. The charming, whimsical town was where I was raised by two very loving parents, the magical place that I was privileged to call home. Indeed, if that wasn't enough eye candy for you, adding to the scenic magnificence, rather like the exotic spices to a delicious Christmas cake, were the viridescent spectacular greens of the wood groves that swathed the countryside in a kaleidoscope of bushy, tall, medium-sized trees that were clustered in ubiquitous congenial groups, from cypress, sweet gums, hickories, pines, red maples, and oaks. The species of trees as varied, unique, and resplendent as the landscape itself, that was decadently teeming with an abundance of indigenous wildlife, along with some well-marked hiking and horse-riding trails that were frequently used by the locals and regular overseas visitors to our neck of the woods. Yet in this beautiful, unassuming, safe country town, a predator was at bay, lurking in the dark shadows with the stealth and cunning of a leopard, his slight figure normally cloaked in a hoodie so that his buried, well-concealed face was literally lost in a sea of black material, ensuring that his identity would be as vague, indeterminate, obscure, and blurred as the clothes themselves. He would slip into the dark shadows like a ghost in the night, disappearing from sight, lost off the radar like a ship at sea. Forget the Scarlet Pimpernel. This man was elusive, like a leopard, as slippery as butter, as hard to catch as a feral cat. The mysterious, featureless stranger was described as wearing an unremarkable pair of black jeans, a mediocre bomber jacket, a very run-of-the-mill standard pair of combat boots, which left you none the wiser as to who he could be, for indeed he could be anyone at all who would fit such an abstract, nondescript, prosaic, faceless, rather beige description. To all intensive purposes, the sagacious, sharp-witted man of the night was as shrewd as he was savvy, perspicacious, calculating, insightfully aware of his surroundings. Every movement, every change of the light, every smell in the air, he knew it all, as if he had become one with the shadows, sinking disingenuously into their murky depths. But who was he? That was the question that lingered on everyone's minds, haunting their darkest nightmares, waking them up prematurely in the night, when a banging sound of a lone tree branch knocked against a window. In all likelihood, nerves were heightened, tension pronounced, energy depleted, drained, for no one was without concerns about the whispering wanderings of the night, for all were exceedingly sensitized to their awareness of the predator now in our midst. Indeed, it was true, people in our small town were troubled, very troubled, about this indeterminate, astucious stranger that was prowling our streets at the dead of night, with nefarious, duplicitous, iniquitous intent, a judicious voucher that was neither discerning nor discriminating in regards to his quarry. Outwardly, it would appear that this stranger was fascinated by women of every age, culture, body type. So a woman in her 80s was equally as vulnerable as a young lady in her 20s, possibly even more so. But what did he want? What was his agenda? What was he doing in our small town? By all accounts, all these questions were flying in the air like the confetti from a confetti canyon, skyrocketing into the clouds, but answers to this enigmatic question were certainly not forthcoming. It was in the summer of 1964. I was 22 years old at the time. People in our little town were becoming increasingly on edge, ever wary of this scheming, duplicitous, ingenious, evasive and slippery predator. Verily, sightings of him loitering around like an offensive, hideously disgusting bad smell were most certainly on the increase, becoming uncomfortably too common. What would he do next was the concern among many. It would seem that hearts increased their beats, minds lost their sense of calm. Fear dangled in the doorways of people's homes like a menacing spiderweb that no one appreciated. Reputably, people's front doors that were once so generously left open were fastidiously locked. Windows were latched, fastened, bolted. The easygoing, convivial, fun-loving ambience of the town had faded away like a bird on the wind, for a tension hung in the air with an atmosphere so heavy you could have cut it with a knife. I was soon to learn that the mysterious hooded man had only recently been spotted, furtively looking into the windows of two vulnerable elderly women, who lived on their own in whimsical, enchanting cottages not too far away from each other. If that wasn't sordid enough, these poor old ladies had woken up in the middle of the night to find a creeping, tall, shadowy figure staring at them, looming over them, watching them as they slept, as if getting some kind of a rush from giving them the fright of their lives. As the late Sheriff Hugh Ingleford would always say, "There are many unhinged people in this world whose motives and actions may be as mysterious and unexplainable as the Bermuda Triangle." This, he believed, was one of those cases, something unfathomable, nonsensical, that left you with more questions than answers. The two old women's accounts of the incident in question were almost like carbon copies of each other. They had been sleeping, sensed a presence, felt as if someone was watching them, looked up from their beds to see these beady eyes hovering over them like a bird of prey from only feet away. They had screamed in terror. The man had vanished. Putatively, despite intensive interviews with the sheriff, all that was revealed about him was no more enlightening. The hooded figure was dressed in black, his face obscure, his dark eyes beady. That certainly didn't give the police much to go on, because put simply, he could be anyone or anywhere. I was working for the sheriff at the time, on and off as a police artist, where I was expected to draw up pictures of suspects from people who had randomly encountered someone of interest that could be a potential suspect in a police investigation. I had subsequently been called around to the sheriff's office to draw up a close picture of the mysterious hooded man, whom had been witnessed close up and personal. So at long last we were closing in on the mysterious stranger. Maybe now we might get some much-needed answers, as a close-up visual description of the man is what everyone had been praying for. As the story goes, the young man, on returning home from the local bar on foot, had stopped dead in his tracks when he'd seen a dark figure peering in the windows of his younger sister's bedroom, which was somehow overshadowed by the imposing presence of a Bradford pear tree. It was at about 6 o'clock at night, but with the outside light of the house still on, along with the bright luminescent full moon, along with the sparkling clusters of silvery stars, the visibility that night was excellent. In his eyes there was no mistaking what he'd seen. He realised at once that this was the town's elusive Peeping Tom that had brought a rural town crumbling to its knees. "Oi!" he called out. "Oi! You here! Get here!" The man glanced up and on seeing the witness began to run away, with the witness in hot pursuit of him. "Oi! Stop! Stop!" Fortunately, he did manage to throw the man onto the ground, succeeding in holding him down hard with a strong, forceful grip, eagerly tugging down his hoodie to see if he recognised the stranger's face. Regretfully, he did not. In a trice, after a big blow to the guts, with a very forceful, pounding, backbiting punch from the hooded stranger, the witness had been momentarily disabled, whilst the young man had risen off the ground with a buoyant jump and made his illustrious escape. Needless to say, this new surprise witness was invaluable to the sheriff in shedding some fresh light on this bizarre, erroneous and baffling case. "This is Michelle," said the sheriff, introducing me to the witness, a man called Michael Ambleflaw, who studied me with interest. "She's our artist. She'll be able to draw the face that you saw. The sooner we get his profile down on paper, the sooner someone might be able to recognize him. Even someone from out of town who might be able to know who the strange man is. Help us to get to the bottom of this very indecipherable case." I nodded. "I hope to be able to do a good job," I said. "Did you get a good view of his face?" I asked the young man. Michael nodded. "I do believe so. A very distinctive face, not one I think I would forget in a hurry. But it wasn't a face that I've seen before, so I reckon he's not from around here. Otherwise he would look familiar to me." "I'll leave you to it, Michelle," said the sheriff, as he watched me settling down at the table with my drawing pad and pencil. "I'm in no doubt people will sleep a lot better in their beds at night, the sooner we catch this imbecile." "Do you mind me asking you a few questions? You see, as an artist, I need to get a full impression of the man, not just a physical one, if you understand. I know it sounds strange, but it makes my picture flow more easily if I have a greater sense of him. It makes him become more alive in my mind's eye, reflects favourably on my sketches. You spotted him when returning from the bar with friends, is that right?" The young man nodded. "It was a spot of luck, really, that I noticed him at all. You see, the Bradford pear tree is literally feet away from my sister's bedroom window. There was a little wind that night, so the graceful branches of the tree were swaggering. I remember thinking the tree looked inebriated, just like I was feeling. I'd drunk a little too much that evening. It was a private joke that I was having with myself, for let's not kid when you're tipsy. The strangest things can be terribly funny. Well, in my peripheral vision, I saw a solid, substantial movement at my sister's window. Oh, it turned my blood icy cold. It alerted my senses to the realization that something was wrong, very wrong. My eyes quickly darted towards the tree. I looked through the branches. That was when I discerned the dense silhouette of a man in black. If I hadn't been looking so intently, I doubt I would have seen him. His dark clothes made him very inconspicuous. I didn't have to think twice about it. I knew at once he was the Peeping Tom that everyone is so flustered about of late. Rightly so. There's something not right about the man. He's clearly unhinged, lost his marbles. Even when I saw the man up close and personal, I got that kind of intuitive feedback about him, let's just say. When you say he was loitering around your sister's window, did you actually see him peering inside? Oh, I saw him peering inside, all right. He was having a jolly good look. I'm convinced he saw my sister undressing. The lights were on in her bedroom. She would have been lightly turning in for the night, getting attired into her nightdress. It would have been a very vulnerable, inauspicious moment for her. Does your sister know about this? Are you kidding? Of course not. I would never let my parents know about this. They wouldn't cope with such knowledge. I informed the sheriff not to breathe a word of this to them, or it would distress them immeasurably. As for my sister, it would freak her out, especially if she knew someone was spying on her. It would make her paranoid. The last thing I need is for my family to stress out. People in town are all very wound up of late. One doesn't need to add fuel to the fire. What do you think he wants? I asked. Isn't it obvious? He's a pervert. No doubt about it in my mind. My sister's pretty, but I gather he's been loitering around old ladies' houses as well, like a noxious bad smell. Goodness knows what the man is after. What did he look like? I asked. Well, he was young, about my age, maybe a little older, possibly 21 or 22. He was slender, built, I suppose, tall, an olive complexion, deep-set dark eyes, very thick, buoyant black hair. He looked as if he could have some Italian lineage, I imagine. A very striking Roman nose. And, yes, well, a railway track raised scar under his eyes, just over here. It had become quite white as opposed to the rest of his skin. It would be exceedingly easy to spot him a mile off if you saw a scar like that, for it sticks out like a sore thumb. Unless, of course, he managed to cover it up with makeup, I suggested. I hadn't thought about that, said the man. I suppose that's a distinct possibility, especially if he knows people are looking out for him. Once I'd finished drawing the sketch, I showed the witness my picture. That's him, said the man. I can't believe it. It's actually him. It must have been a couple of days after drawing the police sketch, when I was in a local coffee shop having coffee with a girlfriend of mine, that something aroused my attention, as the picture of the Peeping Tom was hanging in my mind like a brand new outfit that I couldn't stop thinking about. Indeed, I couldn't think of anything else since I'd applied that pencil to paper. As usual, the conversation that morning veered towards the Peeping Tom in our town, who was robbing all of its citizens of a good night's sleep. The men were worried about their daughters and wives. The women were concerned about their safety. Presumably all sensed that in a matter of time the Peeping Tom could potentially morph into a rapist or murderer. Many women, young and old, trembled every night when they switched off their lights, ever mindful that looming in the dark shadows was a predator waiting to strike if given half a chance. I'm just so glad a witness has finally stepped forward, that you were able to draw a picture of him, said my friend Sally, sipping her coffee reflectively. It was exceedingly brave of the young man to pull off the peeper's hoodie. Fortunately, he got a good view of the anomalous stranger, which is a flying start for everyone. The good news is that with a scar like that under his eyes, someone is bound to spot him sooner or later. I mean, the pictures of him are all around town now, on every telegraph pole. But no one seems to know who he is or where he's from. That's the strange thing about it all. I mean, what ails a young man like that to go peeking on women like this, especially old vulnerable women? Even so, by all accounts, he hasn't really done anything wrong yet, has he? Are you kidding, Sally? I snapped. Of course he's done something wrong. He was watching two elderly women sleep. He broke into their houses in the middle of the night. I think he's working up the courage for upgrading his attacks from the benign to something infinitely more sinister. But he's not quite there yet. We need to catch him in time before his nefarious fantasies become acted out in our reality. It was in that moment I glanced up towards the delicatessens. I saw the lanky silhouette of a young man piling a couple of doughnuts into a brown paper bag. There was something about his mannerism, the swift movements, that got my attention. He seemed shifty, his eyes darting around the coffee shop to see if anyone was paying him any attention. They weren't. I couldn't see his facial profile closely enough. I needed a much better look. I excused myself from the table. Where are you going? Asked Sally. One of those doughnuts is calling my name. I'm going to get it. I moved willfully towards the tray of doughnuts on display, standing a hair's breadth away from the young man, who had turned his attention away from the doughnuts and was mindfully hovering over the cinnamon buns like a bee over a can of cola. In his hands was another open brown bag. It seemed he was wrestling with himself indecisively, whether to get 3 or 4 cinnamon buns, as the tongs in his hands seemed to waver. I would make it 4. 4 cinnamon buns, I said. You can never have too many. Besides, this coffee shop makes the best gooey cinnamon buns in town. The saying less is more does not apply in this case. I would say more is infinitely more preferable. The young man looked up at me for a second. His intense brown eyes met mine. Then I saw it. Granted, it was covered by a pale splash of makeup, 2 shades lighter than his own skin, but yes, it was the indisputable scar from my picture of the town Peeping Tom. I was in no doubt about this. I had found him. I could hardly believe it. The excitement welled up in my veins, while my heart began to thunder so fast in my chest. I was sure everybody could hear it. You're probably right, said the man, placing another bun in his bag. More is preferable. Then he headed towards the counter to pay for his baked goods. Thanks, he said. I nodded, dashing over to the table where Sally was drinking her coffee. She looked up at me in surprise. Where's your doughnut? I thought you said it was calling your name. Oh no, you haven't already eaten it, have you? Sorry, Sally. Let's take a rain check on coffee this morning. Something's just come up. What? I didn't hear her words as I darted out of the coffee shop and surreptitiously hid myself behind a telephone box in the street, watching, waiting for the young man to make his appearance. Then I saw him coming out of the shop, walking towards the bus stop, where he stood in line behind a couple of elderly ladies who were nattering away excitedly to each other about the latest Andy Griffith show. It wasn't long before the young man hopped onto the local bus, carrying in his hand a large white plastic bag, which I guess contained some of the baked goods that he had just bought. I was following close behind him, ever grateful not to be observed. I sat down on my seat, only to sense the brown eyes of the young man boring into mine like an angry buzzard. I noticed his expression looked dark. He wasn't pleased to see me. I waved at him cordially, putting on a cheerful smile on my face, feigning that I was equally as surprised to see him as he was to see me. "Who would have thought I'd see you again?" I joked. "It's such a small world beyond the bakery." The young man's face visibly relaxed. He turned away from me to face the front of the bus. He slouched back comfortably onto the seat, his long, lanky legs stretched out before him. He was the kind of person you'd hate to sit next to on a plane, for he would greedily steal all the legroom. I watched him opening the brown bag to eat one of his cinnamon buns, chewing it slowly as he glanced out of the windows as a few scant raindrops trickled from the darkening skies, splattering their pitiful deluge against the panes. The bus drove into the heart of the countryside, past exquisite green fields, tobacco, cotton and sweet potato farms, along with little barns and scatterings of pretty trees that clustered the landscape in verdant celestial gatherings, past a mesmerizing silvery lake that twinkled under the soft dancing light of the sun, rather like a reflectant silvery jewel. The young man tapped the bell to announce his desire to disembark. The bus ground to a stop, making that horrible squeaking psh sound when compressed air is finally released. It ground to a halt, waiting for its passengers to disembark. I raised myself with my feet to climb off the bus after the man. At this point I knew that I couldn't hide myself from him, so I got off the bus boldly, my head held high with a purposeful resolve. At this the young man looked heartily annoyed. "You again? If I didn't know any better, I'd think you were following me. What's your problem, lady? Who put you up to this?" "Of course I'm not following you. I live around here," I lied brazenly. The young man looked exceedingly doubtful. "There's not much human habitation around here, lady. No one gets off the bus here, but clearly you do, which is a turn-up for the books. It's remote out here, not a soul around for miles. You expect me to believe your tall, fabricated story? Lady, you're following me. I'd like to know why. I have a right to know. I smelt a rat the moment you started talking about those cinnamon buns at the coffee shop. I mean, who does that?" "That's where you're very wrong," I said, thinking quickly on my feet. "I happen to travel around in a Winnebago, if you must know. It's illegally parked around there, on that farmer's field over there," I said, pointing in the distance. "You shouldn't think the worst of people, just because I happen to get off the bus at the same stop as you did. I mean, why on earth would I be following you? The idea is ludicrous," I said, giving an exaggerated sigh and shaking my long mane of hazel-brown hair rather too vigorously. At this I proceeded to take a right turn, walking through the trees, nodding to him as I did, not daring to turn around as I walked forward, for I knew beyond question he was still watching me. Why I never felt apprehensively overwrought about what I was doing is something that boggles me to this very day. I think I secretly fancied the idea of opening the local paper, with the stark, blazing headlines, "Fearless North Carolina Girl Valiantly Discovers the Whereabouts of the Town Peeping Tom, Leading to His Arrest, and to the Resumation of Much-Needed Peace to the Local Community," when I was sure the young man had been fooled by my fabulously guileful act, of which even I applauded. I was feeling marvellously impressed with myself. I hadn't even given anything away, but maintained my cool, despite his audacious interrogation of me. I was confident that he had been deceived by my act. I was beginning to secretly fancy myself as an undercover officer. I would be absolutely brilliant at the job. I turned around to retreat from whence I'd come, back onto the long red dirt road, with so many trees dotting the landscape on either side. I knew that providing I stealthily darted from one tree to another on the raised embankment, I could follow him easily under cover. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that this man was the Town Peeping Tom, for that scar under his eyes, that was so badly concealed by a thin coat of foundation, was a huge giveaway. It had to be him. I knew it with every fibre of my being. I mean, who else could it be? He'd gone to such lengths to conceal his scar. If he had nothing to hide, then why would he do it? He knew he was a wanted man. That was why. Consequently, with my picture taking precedence over every telephone pole in town, he was running scared, possibly seeking shelter in a wooded area, lying low, camping rough. I meant to find out where his location was so that I could lead the police directly to him like the cat to the mouse hole. I watched the young man walk down the dirt road. He wasn't wearing his usual dark regalia. Instead, he was wearing a long pair of bell-bottom, slim-fitting faded blue jeans, a white polo shirt, while a patterned sports jacket was tied around his waist. He kicked the ground with his boots, occasionally stopping dead in his tracks to look behind him, as if he sensed that someone was watching him. I noticed he seemed unsettled, perturbed, even annoyed. He was definitely behaving like a man who had something to hide. As I was trailing him, I got the sense that I too was being trailed. Now I knew my imagination had to be playing tricks on me, yet I was certain something else was following me. I could hear a distinct rustle, the ominous sound of underbrush being crunched beneath heavy bipedal feet. It even felt as if the ground seemed to boom ever so slightly. I tossed my wavering doubts to one side, secretly chastising myself for having such a colourful, vibrant imagination. Once again the grey skies struggled to cry, as they sprinkled a few droplets of rain onto the ground, some hitting my cheek with a refreshing wetness. But then again, as quickly as it had started, the rain receded. I was ever grateful for such small mercies, for the last thing I wanted was to be caught out in the rain. For then where would I seek cover while waiting for another bus heading back to town? And that could take a long time. All of a sudden the young man turned around in the dirt road. He stood as still as a statue, his back as straight as a pencil, almost as if his senses had been alerted. He reminded me of a startled white-tailed deer that had picked up the scent of a predator on the wind. For a while he said nothing. His eyes scanned the terrain. He looked intently at every tree that fringed the embankment. Oh my God, I thought. He knows I'm following him. Perhaps I'm not so discreet after all. Maybe my masterful powers of sleuthing weren't so artful after all as I'd initially perceived. "I know you're there, lady," came the young man's voice. "You think this is some kind of a joke, following me like this?" At that I remained very still, hardly daring to breathe. But as I stood still, I discerned something else breathing in close proximity to me, so much so, in fact, that I could feel the vaporous breath on the back of my neck. Whatever it was, it sounded alarmingly like a horse. I was startled. I looked around my immediate vicinity, and standing about a foot behind me was the biggest hairy giant that I've ever seen. What the heck was it? I wondered in horror. I was so terrified, completely taken off guard, that I wanted to scream. But I realised that the creature's demeanour was playful, almost as if he thought my stalking the Peeping Tom was some kind of fun game of which he wanted to play an intrinsic part. I was astounded by his presumptions. I discerned he had a youthful, playful, jubilant energy, which suggested he was a juvenile. Yet how could he be? He was 8 foot tall, 700 pounds, for goodness sake. He was monstrously big, burly, strapping, exceedingly intimidating. In those days I'd never heard of a Bigfoot or even the abominable snowman, so I was flummoxed as to what he could be. I studied the creature through intrigued eyes. The fear I had initially felt dissipated, like the smoke rising from a chimney. This creature was terribly friendly towards me, not possessing any aggressive tendencies that would lead me to feel afraid. Besides, he was remarkably human. The only way I can describe the gargantuan creature to you is that he looked like a wild man, covered in long flowing brown hair, with overlong arms, powerful legs, a pyramid-shaped head, and the face that was so human it was astonishing. Deep-set dark eyes, flat nose, square jawline, high cheekbones, sloped forehead. He looked as if Native American Cherokee lineage was coursing through his veins, for he had the look or appearance of a noble Indian chief, if you like. I could hear the footsteps of the young man approaching us, while the strange creature was indicating for me to hide. He was flustered, jubilant, excited, enthusiastic, his sparkling brown eyes absolutely thrilled, enamoured, like a kid involved in an exciting, fabulous game of hide-and-seek. I sensed he really thought that this was the most phenomenal game. Of course he did. I desperately tried to hide. I didn't fancy being interrogated by the suspicious young man again. I scrambled for cover, behind a tree, but my movements were clumsy, bumbling, uncoordinated. I slipped on a gnarled root, finding myself staring into the eyes of the indignant man. My worst nightmare coming to pass. This is not what I had anticipated. Brown, enraged, belligerent eyes bored into mine. I could hear a snorting sound from behind one of the trees from the strange creature, who was obviously finding the fact that I'd been caught out terribly funny. On reflection, I suppose his kind are so brilliant at hiding in plain sight that my thumbling inability to succeed in such a simple endeavour must have been terribly amusing to him. I think I get that. Lady, why the heck are you following me? There's no Winnebago, is there? You made all that up. You've been following me since you found me in the coffee shop. Who hired you? I know who you are, I said, wavering an accusory finger at him. I know who you are. Well, at least that's a start. Then finally you might start telling me the truth, woman. The name is Michelle, I corrected him. Well, at least you can finally tell me the truth, Michelle. Who hired you to follow me? Was it Millie Parker? Huh, I might have known. You can tell her for me that I'm not coming back. I never will. Tell her to leave me alone, to stop hounding me. I made my decision. I don't want to live with her. Get it? Tell her I'm old enough to make it on my own. She has no legal hold over my life anymore. I don't need her breathing down my back, for goodness sake. The woman has never been there for me. She thinks a touch of sobriety changes everything. Tell her I am tired of being stalked. I'm tired. I've had enough. Millie Parker, I said, gulping the air in surprise, as if I was choking on it. I don't know any Millie Parker. I don't know what you're talking about. So then, if it wasn't Millie who hired you, then who did? You're a private detective, right? If you don't mind my saying, you're pretty lousy at your job. I figured you were following me way back. You should possibly consider another profession. You're a pathetic sleuth. I could feel the anger and indignation rising up in my face. How dare you? I'm a very good sleuth. I found you after all, when the whole town is looking for you. I know exactly who you are. You're the Peeping Tom. That's why I've been following you. The police need to be informed of your whereabouts. You've been spotted prying into people's windows at night, watching women undress in compromising positions. You're a pervert, the lowest of the low. What? Said the young man, the corner of his mouth twitching in amusement. You think I'm a Peeping Tom? I've heard everything now. I've been called many things in my life, but a Peeping Tom, that cuts the cake. What are you smoking, woman? I'm smoking nothing. I'm a police artist. I happen to know that you're the perpetrator. I drew you myself. Oh, I see. You're the one that drew those printed pictures all around town that have been posted up everywhere. I've got to admit, they do look uncannily like me. The resemblance is remarkable, but I assure you they're not me. I am not the Peeping Tom. But you have the same scar as the perpetrator, I insisted, pointing to the area under his eye. You're hiding the scar under your eye, concealing it with foundation. The Peeping Tom has the same scar. In my book, there are no coincidences. I hide my scar, woman. It's unsightly. And it's not a scar if you must know it's a birthmark. That doesn't change anything. All of a sudden, a couple of pine cones came flying towards us. What the heck is that? Said the young man, stopping dead in his tracks, when the jubilant, delighted figure of the big hairy creature made his rambunctious appearance known. He was like one of those boisterous dogs, thumping around the place in an excited frenzy, obliviously unaware of the disadvantages and ramifications of his huge, monstrous size. The creature was not appreciating being ignored. The young man looked astonished on seeing the critter, so much so that for a fleeting second I seriously thought he was going to pass out from the sheer shock of it. His mouth hung open like a Venus flytrap. His eyes grew round like saucers. "Oh, my God! Oh, my God!" He began to run away from the creature as fast as he could, with me trailing after him, along with the hairy creature by my side, who thought this nonsensical game was getting better every second, as all the running, hiding, and screaming were exceedingly exciting in his book. All of a sudden I could hear the most deadly roar, as something was screaming blue murder from the woods. Whatever it was charging towards us like a herd of bison, beating, pounding, cracking the earth, causing the ground to heave, groan, and vibrate. In that moment, the ear-piercing, shrill, discomposing sound caused us to stop dead in our tracks, like when the music stops in a game of musical chairs. It was the most bone-chilling sound I've ever heard. It caused my blood to freeze over. The large, hairy, very playful creature became stoic and quiet. He let out a frightened whimper, as though scared or rather intimidated. It was clear he knew who was coming our way, perceived that he was in trouble, big trouble, from what I assume must be a belligerent parent. The poor comical creature begrudgingly glided away towards the sound, his eyes filled with disappointment. I could hear the angry background raised voice of a female, which I deduced must be the creature's mother, giving him a piece of her mind, possibly telling him to stay well away from humans if he knew what was good for him. The young man who I was to discover was called Ivan insisted on taking the bus right back with me to visit the police station to prove that he had absolutely nothing to hide and that he was definitely not the peeper. I want to prove to you that I'm no peeping Tom. Yes, I was hiding from my mother, Millie, who believes now that her days of alcoholic intoxication are behind her, that I should be there to entertain her during her sobriety, to help her while away the boring, monotonous drudgery of her daily life. She abandoned me when I was young. She never wanted me around, but now she wants me there all the time, to control my life. She refuses to allow me to have space or any independence. I'm far too old to be under my mother's clutches, but she appears to think very differently about the matter. I've run away a couple of times from her before. She's trailed me every time with a private detective on my back. So that was why I was lying low, camping out in the woods. As you can imagine, I felt like a complete idiot when a couple of weeks later the real perpetrator or Peeping Tom was actually caught. I certainly felt as if I had egg on my face. He was a mentally ill, seriously disturbed man who had run away from the mental facility, was fixated by women. He was on medication to suppress his amorous sexual urges. If he hadn't been caught in time, the stalking could ultimately have morphed into rape. When I saw the man's picture in the paper, he was a dead ringer for Ivan, with a similar scar under the eye. But I suppose weirder things have happened. As for the creature I encountered, it was definitely a Bigfoot. It was so funny how he stumbled up to me when I was trailing Ivan and thought it was all terribly exciting, rather like a fabulous game of which he wanted to partake. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Until next time, goodbye and good night.